And we're live, ladies and gentlemen. And okay, well, welcome to another episode of Dojo Live. We're broadcasting live from our offices here in Mexico City, and from Nearsoft's Mexico City offices, by the way. And today we're going to have a very special guest, Terence Craig. Terence is a partner at Ludloff-Craig and Associates, which is a big data consulting firm in California. And also, we're going to have today Luis Dario Davila. He's a fellow Nearsoftian who oversees the Salesforce administration part, among many other endeavors that he's currently engaged in. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Welcome. It's my pleasure to have you here, guys, today. And without further ado, because we are 5 minutes past the hour, I'd like to just get the talk started. I understand, Terence, that you are going to be talking to us about a rather, I think, well, because I'm not an engineer, from my non-engineering point of view, I would say it's definitely one of those topics that get your attention. Near real-time streaming, the cloud, and the Internet of Things. Am I right?
It is a broad topic, and there's lots of fun stuff to talk about. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm sure it is, definitely. And so I'll tell you what, Terence, I'm not going to hold you any longer, so I'd like to start by asking you the first question here. Why did you decide on this particular topic? Let's start by that. It must be for obvious reasons, but tell us and our audience as well. Why did you choose this particular topic?
Primarily because it's what I've been working on for pretty much the last 20 years. I started out doing. I'm going to age myself. I actually was one of the first people to work on relational database for client server and enterprise applications at a company called Ask Computer Systems, which actually predated Oracle and ERP and SAP. We were really the sort of the pioneers on creating enterprise resource planning for non-mainframe computers. And as part of that, we decided to use relational databases. For those of you who are familiar with relational database history, the first guy who taught us how to use an RDB was actually Date, who worked with COD on defining relational algebra, which shows you how long ago that was. And from there, I've just been involved in creating data projects that have always been, I hate the term big data, I should state up front, but I've always been involved in creating databases that were larger than sort of the average database of the technology platform at the time. So the topic is just really me following through the natural progression of my career. I also wrote a book for O'Reilly called Privacy and Big Data. As data has become more sophisticated, analytics technology has become more sophisticated, the privacy implications have grown sort of dramatically. And so about 3 years ago, my business partner and I wrote a book on privacy and big data for O'Reilly that dealt with a lot of the implications of these issues, particularly from a policy standpoint, but also from a technology standpoint. So the short answer to your question is it's what I'm interested in. I have hopefully some interesting comments, expertise to share with the audience. We'll see how it goes.
Absolutely. We're all looking forward to it, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are also going to be looking forward to it as well. And okay, let's see. Now, I'd like to start also by asking you at least my first question, and then I'll let you do to elaborate on that at your leisure and convenience. I understand that. Well, you mentioned that the words data and analytics, right? When you introduce your topic, and how would you say that we can ensure that new data and analytics products are designed for successful delivery to new and existing customers?
Well, actually, that's one of my favorite. I just shut down a startup over the last 6 months that was really trying to address what I view as some of the fundamental problems with the big data analytics industry, which is
Uh-huh.
primarily, if you look at Hadoop in particular, but most of the well-known open source platforms for big data were designed to help web-scale companies run their businesses. Google with MapReduce, Yahoo with Hadoop, which was based on the big table paper out of Google. And what you've got is you've got a set of technologies that were designed to be used by literally the best computer scientists in the world. And what the venture community did was poured a bunch of money into those platforms and said, hey, average IT guy, go create big data things. And that hasn't worked out well. And the reason that you don't see sort of the ubiquitous data platforms that we would like is that we still haven't addressed a couple of things. One, most companies don't. A lot of the consulting I do has to do with people coming to us and saying, hey, we've got all of these data assets that we've created over 30 years of operations.
Mm-hmm.
We know that we could sell, so for example, if you were a real estate company, you could probably sell your operational data to governments who want to track the health of the economy, for example. And we get lots of people coming to us with projects like that. One of the problems, though, is if you look at the maturity of their IT organizations and the high level of technical ability and understanding that is required to do a commercial big data project or product, most organizations don't have the capabilities. And I think that what you're starting to see now, I actually wrote a blog about this several months ago.
Mm-hmm.
What you're starting to see is you're starting to see most of the interesting movement in big data is coming from established companies in the SaaS space. Salesforce is doing a ton now with big data, Internet of Things. Microsoft, and also people you wouldn't expect, Workday, the HR company. And the reason I think these guys are going to be much more successful than sort of the homebrew big data companies is they've already got the infrastructure. In many cases, if you look at Salesforce and Workday, they already have customers' critical data already sitting on their servers. So you don't have to make infrastructure investments. And so I think we're finally moving to a point where big data is becoming more of a service offering as a utility, as opposed to something like ERP that people are going to maintain in their own infrastructure. The other
Mm-hmm.
difference is the big data really gets interesting with interacting with others, with the outside world, either selling your data to somebody's information or utilizing it so that your collaborative commerce works better.
Mm-hmm.
And that movement, the movement towards the cloud makes a ton of sense because even if you look at something as ancient as electronic data interchange, right? The exchange of orders, inventory management, back and forth between companies, that is still too difficult for a ton of mid-sized organizations, right? Walmart's great at it, but your mom and pop retailer still stinks at EDI. And so I think this movement towards the cloud for really complex infrastructure-driven applications like big data, streaming analytics, Internet of Things is both natural and should be expected.
Mm-hmm.
Now I will say the controversial thing, which is why have VCs put hundreds of millions of dollars into on-premise big data solutions? That's a question you would have to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't actually think that's. I think companies like Salesforce, Microsoft through Azure, potentially AWS if they become more enterprise friendly, is where I think the data industry in general is going to go because of the complexity and because of the infrastructure needs. That was a really long answer to your question, so hopefully I'll hand it over to you guys at that point.
No, no, actually, I mean that's great. I mean, the more we can squeeze out of you, the better, because this is like what I like to call a one-shot opportunity to to get to talk to like real experts in specific fields. So no, actually it's the other way around. Thank you, Terence. Dario, I'd like to turn over to you, and I understand you have assembled some questions, right? So let's start. Let's continue with you, please. I have my own set of questions myself. There's more than one, of course, but you go ahead and do your thing.
I'm not hearing him. Do you guys?
Dario?
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
That happens a lot, so let's not worry about that.
Okay, you mentioned AWS and all this infrastructure as a service kind of business model that is going to be the future. So what do you think that is going to be what is the last piece that it needs to, like a normal company, a normal IT guy, to go to AWS and start to really hasten the big data capabilities? What is the thing that is needed there?
Well, I actually think it's really basic, easy ETL and predictable cost, right? Because right now, think about your average MIS guy and what he goes to. Okay, CEO comes in, let's do a big data project. Oh, great, new technology, et cetera, et cetera. So now I've got to go set this thing up. Big data, almost by definition, is unbounded. How do I budget for that? Right? How do I figure out how this great initiative that my CEO wants to do is going to cost me? How do I figure out what's the relationship between cost and performance? Right? All of these very complex issues that, you know, in the old days, you went out and bought a bunch of hardware, hoped you got it right, build it as best you could. With the cloud, it's different, and particularly big data is most useful when it is collaborative B2B, which means that people are sending you data, which could be unbounded. So, but, you know, Azure and AWS still have to get paid. And what do? You shut off these. So think about, you know, we did a bunch of work on Wall Street with financial services firms. And one of the issues that we have is you cannot tell a bank, an investment bank, oh, well, sorry, we ran out of budget, so we're no longer processing the stock fee. You could do that, but you're going to be sued unconscious. And those are the sort of issues that need to be dealt with. One of the problems, and Microsoft actually, I think, is doing a better job of supporting ISVs than almost anybody, because they're starting to deal with things like credit risk. So, for example, I have a customer come in and sign up for my nifty data warehouse as a service. And he runs through, 100 terabytes of processing compute. Bill comes 30 days later, he says, oops. Now, I, as an ISV, owe Microsoft a ton of money, all right? But I don't have the infrastructure or the ability to manage that credit risk, et cetera, et cetera. And for data warehouse as a service, or big data as a service to become real, the large companies are going to have to find a way to manage the credit risk for ISVs and or smaller companies, or it's just not going to happen, because variable costs are death when you're a small company. Yeah. Right? And, if I'm Chevron, yeah, I can go do an oil analysis on Azure and not worry about it, because I can't spend more money than I have. But if I'm a 200-person company trying to do some Salesforce analysis, I can't just take for granted that I have unlimited budget. And those are the sort of issues, I think. The second issue that is a really simple one, but it's one of the things that killed BI, is there's no decent ETL process still to this day that's easy, fast, performant, and predictable across large data sets. All right? And the amount of time I've gone into customers, and they have all these great ideas, but they can't even figure out how to get their data loaded up into the cloud in a rational way. And and then, or let's not even talk about master data management, right? So okay, we figured out how we're going to load the data up, but what does customer mean? I have a definition of customer. Division A has another division of customer. Oh wow, they're the same customer, right? Those are all of the, it's blocking and tackling. And as an industry, we got so into arguing about the number of petabytes we could process or the number of the amount of CPUs we could put in a cluster, we forgot that none of that matters unless we can give users an easy, repeatable way to load their data up, to guarantee that the data has some reasonable level of integrity, and to give them a way to predict their cost. None of this is rocket science, and none of it has been dealt with in any systematic way by any of the vendors. Though I do think the Azure guys, at least, are starting to think about that because they've worked with ISVs and partners enough that they understand the blocking and tackling issues in a way that I would argue that Google and Amazon probably don't, because that's not their business. You know, they don't produce software for sale. And so those are some of the issues I think that have slowed down adoption.
Oh, thanks a lot. And you mentioned that you were one of the first to really get into relational the database. How was the process into getting the relational database into JSON database queries? What was like the highlights of that process?
Well, so for me, as I started out, my first persistent storage was, RDBs, and, was raised in, sort of third normal form, atomic transactions, or God, et cetera, et cetera. And you guys are probably familiar with the term impedance mismatch. So when object orientation got very popular, the term impedance mismatch, or this idea, how do I map my program space, which is objects now, to this flat tabular structure that is relational algebra. And you saw object relational mappers, ton of work, et cetera, et cetera. And somewhere in the middle of that, I think I was working in the semiconductor industry at the time, I started wondering why I was fighting so hard to force a program that was written for one purpose against a data store that would only be used for one purpose. Why in the heck was I fighting to make my program match my data store, since what I sell is the program, right? And that really started me looking at, because I had worked at Informix, which was now IBM, which was a major relational database vendor at the time. And it just became very clear that by removing the overhead of the impedance mismatch and doing what, we did some things internally at a company I was working at, KLA, that really sort of was a document database in sort of a brain-dead sort of way. So I think the evolution from what I would call command and control persistence, the idea that I have a large enterprise, and it is most efficient for me in that enterprise to have a common data store that my IT guys can write against and have that data shared and consistent, is a fundamentally different problem than an ISV who has a dedicated job. And the idea that he's going to force his program into the structure that was designed to let IT share data across the enterprise is just stupid. And I think the document databases, the sort of the multimodal types of persistence that we have now, is just a reflection of the fact that we finally figured out that there are lots of ways to store data, and they are completely dependent on the problem that you're trying to solve. Now, when I get on my high horse and talk to clients, this sounds like I'm anti-relational database. That's not the case. I think relational databases are great when you have a shared resources, when you're trying to do multiple different applications with the same data set. I think the structure and rigidity, third normal form, all of that is very useful for that use case. But why in the world that those of us who sell specific applications for a living decided that trying to beat ourselves into the relational structure made sense, I have no idea.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if you have a question, Carlos. Oh. You can just
Yeah, of
continue.
course I do. Okay, yeah, and I'm right into it. But before we get into that, just a quick pause. And I'd like to remind the audience that they can send us their questions. Just click on, if you're watching us either on our YouTube channel or on our page, click on the Be Part of the Conversation link. Just click it, and it'll take you to our Q&A window. Just type your questions, and we'll read them off to Terence, and we'll get back to you. Okay. Uh, Yeah, of course I do have questions, and one of the most, the one that's been twirling around my head for the last 30 minutes before, also was the topic of privacy. I think privacy is a key uh, concern for more reasons than we can even imagine. And I also understand that Terence, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about it in a bit. I understand you have a book on that in privacy and big data,
Mhm.
right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So as I was looking at your material and also generically thinking, one of the things that I wanted to ask you regarding privacy is, and I think this might be like a little touchy, thorny topic. Maybe
Good.
the NSA is watching or something, Big Brother is watching or something. That's okay. I mean, we're good guys. Uh, uh, and I'm talking about why would you say that the big guys in information handling, like in big data and such, what the big guys or what's called the internet giants, why have they become privacy advocates?
Oh, I think that one's an easy one, and I love to talk about this stuff. So the reason that the sort of the web scale companies have become privacy advocates is very simple. After Snowden went public, people were seeing something like 20% drops in revenue internationally, and you had whole governments switching to open source software from commercial software because it's one thing to know that your government is spying on you. It's another thing to know that your software vendor's government, who's not your government, is spying on you. And so I to their credit, I would say that Google in particular, I'll give Google some kudos here. I remember Eric Schmidt, I think almost 15 years ago, said that, look, we can predict where you're going to go to dinner and who you're going to go out on dates with, but we're not going to do it because we realize it's intrusive and it'll scare the hell out of people. And I think that the public is just now starting to realize that the digitization of our daily lives through things like iPhones, LinkedIn, Google, Netflix, has sort of removed any illusions of sort of modern privacy, which is privacy is interesting because it's really a new concept. Privacy came into sort of human thought with urbanization. We were rich enough that we didn't have to sleep 30 people to a townhouse with a cow, right? And that in in the scope of human innovation, that's a very, very short time frame. And what we've done is we've essentially technologized ourselves out of the ability to have privacy in any meaningful way if we want to take advantage of the conveniences of internet shopping, being able to find a job over the internet, being able to be constantly connected to your iPhone. And so it's just I think that the public is now becoming comfortable with that. If there's been several studies of U.S. kids that have been raised in the Facebook age,
Mm-hmm.
they don't value privacy. But it's interesting, what the studies show is not that they don't value privacy because they don't think privacy is valuable. They believe that privacy is impossible in a modern society. And I tend to agree with them. But what we can do is we can force vendors and governments, and the U.S. is particularly bad at this, as Snowden showed, to be honest about how they use the data. I have less objections to collection of data. I have huge objections to lack of transparency. And part of the problem now is that in the U.S., for example, there are many things that the U.S. government is by law not allowed to collect about its citizens, but they can turn around and buy them from Facebook, right? And so that one of my personal goals is to make people aware of the fact that they are living in a non-private world, which I actually think has a ton of benefits. But I think the moral issue here is that people are starting to believe that people still believe that they have a level of privacy that just doesn't exist in any modern industrialized nation. And I think it's incumbent upon us as technologists to make sure that people understand that, and to make sure that we're clear about the benefits of that, and we're clear about what we can do as technologists and citizens of free societies to make sure that this technology is not used to form a repressive regime and to enable repressive government things. I could care less if Google knows that I prefer Crest toothpaste to some other toothpaste. Just don't care. But do I want my government to know my religious beliefs, who my friends are, that I'm a lot less comfortable with. And I think that's the balance that we have to find. But understand, 2 years ago, I sat down and talked to a lady who's on the board of one of the largest blood donation organizations in the world. And they're talking about using sort of the digital world to improve distribution of this stuff by 400%. Yes. Will that cut into people's privacy? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Yeah, as long as we have that discussion and we understand. You could say the same thing about water. Crime is actually becoming really interesting. The Minority Report was a really interesting idea, right? So if you can predict a guy's a criminal, is it okay to watch him more? Is it okay to pick him up? Right? Because according to the algorithm, you're a criminal, right? What do I do about that?
Yeah, that's definitely something worth giving it serious thought. I have actually 1, 2, 3 more questions, but I'd like to turn over now the mic, so to speak, to one of our participants, one of the viewers from the audience. And I have a question from the audience actually he's one of our fellow Nearsoftians, Eduardo Paul. Eduardo is asking you, Terence, specifically, what do you think about Google Brillo? Have you already tried Brillo?
No, actually, I'm actually not familiar with Brillo, and I've just actually started to dealing with GCE because I like what they're doing in AI. What is Brillo? Or I can go look it up, actually. But no, I love doing these things. I always learn something.
Oh, please. Feast on it.
All right. So it's another IoT. So here's what I think in general, and I'm not familiar with Brillo, but I've been following what Salesforce has been doing and what Microsoft has been doing pretty extensively. I actually think that the IoT hubs in general are one of these things that in some ways seems to be a solution looking for a problem. Because at the end of the day, IoT is what? An IP-enabled device that reports back at some regular interval, usually at high frequency. And the interesting part of the problem is that you potentially have millions of the things coming in, and you need to do some form of analysis to make the information useful. In a lot of ways, I don't think this is any different than CEP, complex event processing. And so which has been around for years, used extensively on Wall Street in particular. And there's some very good solutions, including some dedicated hardware solutions as well. So without having looked at Brillo, and I'll state that up front, I'm just not convinced by all of the vendors running and saying that we have IoT-specific solutions as opposed to broader streaming analytic answers.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if you solve the streaming analytics and the CDP problems, which people have done, certainly in the on-premise world at very large scale, it's not clear to me what additional value these IoT-specific solutions add.
Okay, I see. Well, thank you for your response, and I hope that clears it, Eduardo. And thank you for your question. And the rest of the audience, again, please by all means send us your questions. We still have a good 20-something minutes, so take advantage of them while Terence is here. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, I'd like to jump into my next question, which is it has to do with. Then let me go back to the how to use data properly. And is there any occasion, Terence, would you say that there's any condition or situation or occasion in which data, regardless how it's managed or acquired, is meaningless?
I think it's never meaningless. It can be fundamentally dangerous. There's actually a very famous case in San Diego. So San Diego uses power consumption to track marijuana grow houses.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and there was a very famous case, and they've done this successfully for a couple of years. There's a very famous case where they broke into this poor family's home and with guns, etc., and arrested people. And it turns out this family just has 5 kids, and they all have 3 iDevices apiece.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like their power consumption looked like a grow house. And so a judge issued a warrant with no other information other than, this is their power usage over the last couple of months. And these people had a SWAT team kick their door in.
Oh.
So so I don't think data is ever neutral. I think if you publish data, it's going to be used. All right. And the problem is these big data solutions give people enough data that they think that they have information,
Mm-hmm.
and it lets people not think. So, I've used this quote before. Big data lets you be stupid faster. All right. There's right.
So there's an emotional maturity issue when it comes to using data.
Well, I think one of the problems is, and I can only speak to the States, but we're fairly innumerate society. We don't understand statistics. We don't understand math generally. Many people that have gone to graduate school still don't have a grasp of numbers and statistics.
Hmm.
And then, so you toss all these numbers and statistics at people, and they can often draw erroneous conclusions because a lot of people believe that if you have a lot of data points, you have information. No, what you have is a lot of data points. And there's statistical techniques to determine if this set of data hits, the necessary level of statistical accuracy. Mm-hmm. And the problem I see is I see a lot of people collecting data, but they're not doing anything they're not doing any of the standard statistical methods to talk about quality of data, accuracy of data, etc. And I think a large portion of the stupidity that you see is just that. And tools like Tableau and other great GUI libraries that let you put together great charts easily, I think have accelerated this trend. Mm-hmm. Because it's just way too easy to put together a scatter diagram and act like you understand math.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. And it's I just wanted to add that, and the reason why I asked that particular question initially about the meaningless part is because it is said that the data could potentially be, and now I'm resorting back to the business context, data could probably be meaningless if without the proper use of analytics.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, well, if you don't understand, things like, basic, standard deviation, error, standard error, et cetera, you just shouldn't be talking about what data means.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds horrible, but the number of times I've sat in meetings and people have drawn conclusions against a data set that just doesn't pass the sniff test.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you fix that without just educating people, or socially, from a business standpoint. If you're going to use big data and statistics, if you're going to have a quote data-driven business,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not also at the same time training everybody in the organization how to do basic stats, well, it's not going to, it's just not going to work out well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Terence. Quick pause. I like to, if I may, I like to just pause for a minute and talk about you specifically about your book.
Okay.
Okay, I understand you put out a book and it's called let's see, it's called Privacy and Big Data. Can you tell us about it, please?
Yeah, privacy and big data. It's dated now. It came out late 2011. But it was basically my co-author and I, Mary Ludloff. We wanted to talk about the implications of the technologies that we were building, which was a real-time analytics system, and sort of the regulatory environment, or lack thereof, that was involved. So we went through and just looked at what people were doing. We spent a lot of time looking at what the U.S. government in particular was doing in terms of things like trying to put chips in computers to protect media. Just lots of weird misunderstandings about the appropriate use of data and the implications of monitoring people. Interestingly enough, a lot of the technology that we discussed in the book is now in common use in China and other places. A lot of stuff that got the so-called Clipper chip is the thing in particular I'm thinking about, which is basically a chip that monitors every piece of media, every document. It can actually do things like actually lock a Word document if it's been prepared correctly, so it can't be used or opened anywhere else except certain PCs. And that sort of pervasive monitoring technology was the drive for the book, because, as I said earlier, we wanted to make sure that people understood both the positives and the negatives of ubiquitous digital technology. And that's what the book is about. If anybody wants to buy the book, I highly recommend the online version because it's got a lot of hyperlinks in it. And this is the other thing I'll say is this is a field that changes so quickly because technology is ramping so quickly, and the law actually is ramping a little slower. So the legal environment changes about, let's call it 10 paces behind the technology environment, which leads to a very interesting environment to try and do a business in that respects the legal implications of privacy. Right? There's a moral implication of privacy that I would argue. People should always be transparent with what they do with people's data. But there's also a legal component, what you're required to do. And what you're required to do in California is much different than what you would be required to do in Mexico City. Mm-hmm. And how do you, if you're a web scale company, Facebook, how do you scale your business when you have to deal with local privacy regulations across the entire world? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it has some broad. For web scale companies, if I was running a web scale company now, my biggest concern would be legal, because I think the legal issues that people are going to get because of the balkanization of privacy laws across the world, and because of government requirements for essentially spying on their citizens, has made those web scale businesses, I would argue, an order of magnitude more difficult than they were 20 years ago.
Okay. Thank you, Terence. And there you have it, folks. It's right there, sharing the screen. You can find it on Amazon. Is there any other place? Do you have a dedicated website for this, or a URL, or can
No,
we just find it
no,
on Amazon?
no, just Amazon, or you can also get it on O'Reilly,
Okay.
the O'Reilly site. And the O'Reilly guys always get mad at me if I don't mention that they have a site for it as well. So.
Okay, great. What's the URL?
See, now they're going to be mad at me again. So I don't know. If you type,
Okay.
yeah, go to Amazon. Go to Amazon. I will find out the Earl to O'Reilly, and I will send it to you so you can put it up on the page.
Yeah,
My
please.
bad.
Yeah.
My bad.
Absolutely. No problem, Terrence. I appreciate it, and we appreciate it. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. And let's go back to you. We still have a few minutes left, Dario. So please, if you have any more questions, Dario, for Terrence, now is the time before we approach the closing of this broadcast.
Yeah, actually, I'm really interested about the things you mentioned about the financial uh, way of,
Hmm.
of entering big data. So when you're talking about finance and stock market to to prevent uh, arbitrage, you really near time or really
Hmm.
quick decisions. So you being an expert in, I don't feel that we are talking a lot about a near time.
Hmm.
So what are your I don't know, what can you tell us about that really quickness needed in the financial way?
Well, so here's the thing that I found the most fascinating about financial markets. So the most expensive real estate in the world is basically the compute rooms in the New York Stock Exchange, because that extra 3 microseconds you can get from locality makes
There
you
are
money.
millions. Yeah.
Yeah, makes you a ton of money. And I think that's the best example of how valuable speed is in the stock market. Other interesting, it's a broad topic. Other interesting things that we did that I found fascinating was there's great interest in real-time sentiment analysis now, and using that as a signal to drive decisions about selling or buying shares. And there's also great concern, by the way, that once you start doing that, Twitter, for example, is incredibly easy to game. And so there's a lot of work being done at real-time analytics of social media feeds to drive investment behavior. And that's some of the most interesting stuff that we've seen. And you get into really interesting arguments about how do you really validate the sentiment of a 140-character tweet, because it's just not a lot of context to work with. And so got to work with a lot of smart people that are working on those issues. One of the more interesting projects we were involved in was looking at sentiment analysis that looked at the acceleration impact of Twitter and social media on mainstream financial writing. So if Barron's puts out an article on IBM that is negative and Twitter picks it up, and how it accelerates, what is the short-term impact on price? So those are the sort of things. The other thing along financial services that I thought was really interesting is, are you familiar with the term flash crash?
Flash crash? No, I don't.
Neither am I.
So,
No.
so flash crash is what they call, so you have automated high frequency trading, right? So completely machine driven black box, algorithms to buy and sell shares. The
Mhm.
flash crash is what happens when those algorithms start selling off in a sort of unrestrained manner, and which causes the market to crash. It's happened a couple of times. So one of the things that people on Wall Street are starting to do now is so flash crash is caused by what is known as black box trading, right? So completely black box, completely computer driven. Now you see people starting to do gray box trading, which is where you have a black box. It's got a tiny delay, and you have a couple of guys that are sitting watching a real-time analytics station that allows them to manipulate and do algorithms on the fly so that they can step in and say, okay, if we follow through these black box transactions, we're going to crash the market or we're going to lose our entire portfolio. And so you're starting to see gray box, which which is where we get what is still the finest neural net on the planet, our brains, involved. And I think in general, my bet is, and I have absolutely no basis for this, my bet is that if you look out, particularly with the interest in AI now, if you look out over the next 10, 15 years, I think AI-assisted decision-making, so-called gray box decision-making, is going to become more and more prevalent because we're starting to make bigger and bigger decisions using AI and black box, but we're starting to come to the realization is that in certain cases that could have really disastrous consequences. It's one of the things you hear discussed a lot. I talk to guys who work on military AI stuff a lot, and that gray box thing, when you're talking about autonomous robots with guns, gray box becomes a little more important, right? And so I think that is one of the things I'm interested in from a research perspective is how can you create gray box systems that allow humans to get involved in fully automated processes and not slow them down.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a big one.
Yeah, and that's a big ask, right? And so, and I think you're going to see a lot of, Wall Street's great. I would recommend anybody that's listening that's interested in AI, real-time analytics, hardware-assisted transaction processing. Look at what Wall Street's doing because those guys have infinite money. They've got some of the best minds in the world, and they've been dealing with these issues, this whole set of issues, everything from AI to near real time to high-speed networking. Those guys have lived and died by it, and one of the problems I see is here in the Valley, there's a lot of guys in the Valley act like, we are the first people to deal with problems of scale or problems of near real time processing, and that's just silly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you really need to merge the fundamental analysis and the technical. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just had to shut my phone.
So yeah, I don't know how much time we have left. If I can make one more question.
Yeah, we still have a few minutes. If you want to do it, go ahead and do it now. So we're good. We have about 6 minutes, and we don't want to. Terence has been too generous with his time, so let's go ahead and take advantage of those 6 minutes and go ahead and shoot.
Okay, I will try. Oh, maybe this. Okay. So yeah, I don't want to make a really interesting question and takes a half an hour of your time. But yeah, okay. So we have like all these topics these trending topics are all these new technologies that are emerging, IoT wearables that are really creating a lot of data, and we have the other part that is going to make that data useful. That is big data. So what are your thoughts or your comments in the future about what is going to make this? How we're going to take all these technologies and make something useful for humans and not the other way.
Well, I think the first thing what we've got to do is we've got to start automating statistics, right? So we've got to when a guy uploads a data set to Azure or to Brillo or whatever, we need to start applying basic statistical consistency algorithms and saying, look, the standard error on this data set is way too high. Don't do this. And bring that level of intelligence, because we're not going to get people to stop doing analysis whether they understand the math or not. So what we need to do is we need to bring in these checks to say to people, look, we understand what you're trying to do. This isn't going to work. And that is not, and once again, it's this research background that a lot of these tools were either created by college professors or written in labs for companies like Google or Yahoo. And I'd love to say that your average MBA is playing at that level, but that's just not the case. And so this stuff only becomes immensely useful if we start finding ways to automate basic statistical knowledge to keep people from making basic math mistakes. The second pillar, I think, is we have to get a really good ETL process going that makes it easy to upload tons of data easily and index it in a way that's useful for analysis. And the final, I guess the final thing is that we have to get better at presenting large data sets. Because one of the problems here is every BI tool on the planet is basically set up on this idea of let's throw away detail to make it computationally possible to represent. And there are lots of, once again, going back to Wall Street, you go into some of these guys, they have 3D hologram things to look at the market. There's lots of new technology for visualization, et cetera, that deals with data at scale. And we've got to get that out into the business context, or once again, it's not that useful. So those are the three things off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks a lot. So yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dario, and thank you, Terence, again, one more time. And Terence, we're approaching the last 3 minutes of our session, and I'd like to ask you if there's anything else you would like to leave our audience with, whether they're watching now or they're going to be watching at a later time. What would you like to leave them with? What would you like to share with them, and to wrap up today's broadcast?
Well, I guess well, in a second I'll toss up my Twitter and stuff if people want to get a hold of me.
Absolutely.
I would say that if you are a technologist or you're a person that's interested in data, we now are entering into the most exciting period in history for people for our skill set. We actually, computer science hasn't really changed the world a whole lot in fundamental ways, but I believe properly done analytics, quantitative self, all of these things are really going to start to change the way we distribute key resources, the way we live. It's also has already started to fundamentally shift the power that citizens have vis-a-vis their government. One of the reasons that governments have lots of power is they have more information. Well, that's becoming less and less true. Now, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, it's for people, that's above my pay grade. But there is a definitive shift in power. There's an increase in information that should allow us to make our world better if we can get these tools at a level that your average MBA or your average government worker can use them to be smarter, as opposed to kicking down the doors of San Diego iPad users, right? And so that's what I'm excited about. That's the reason I'm in the business. The other thing I would say to people, particularly people who are running companies that have data, be sure before you start a huge big data initiative that you have the capabilities to actually enter into this. I would say probably 60% of our clients, I tell them no, don't do big data because you don't have an engineering organization that's mature enough. You don't have a consistent data model for your data. There's lots of blocking and tackling that has to be done to be successful at any large software project, particularly any large big data project, because there's so many moving parts. So those are my final words.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that what's left for us, thank you, Terence, again. What's left for us to do is, I'd like to make use of our latest addition to our roster of technological tools for video streaming. So here goes.
Perfect.
Okay. There you have it, folks. You can find Terence, Terence on Twitter. It's Terence Craig on Twitter. There you have it.
All right, and also I'll toss in a plug for blog.patternbuilders.com, which is
please.
where I do most of my writing. So blog.patternbuilders.com. Actually, let me show up I'll store up my little thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can just
not as quite as low tech, but close.
Okay.
All right, and so down, yeah, so blog.patternbuilders.com, Terence Craig, and also if you want to reach me through email, lca@patternbuilders.com.
Absolutely. Okay.
All
Would you
right,
can you repeat the email address that for the
L
audience to use?
LCA
Mm-hmm.
at pattern PATTERNBUILDERS.com.
Okay, that would be Pattern Builders, right?
Yep.
Excellent. Alrighty. Yeah, I think we have we have it pretty much covered today. And Terence, I really want to thank you for having agreed to be here with us today and have this wonderful talk. And as I said at the beginning, before we went on the air, you're going to be getting one of these babies here and some other tokens of appreciation. And and that's pretty much it. And I also want to thank Dario for having agreed to be here with us today as a co-host. You did a
No,
great job
thank you.
as usual. You did a great job. And thank you from the
Thank you,
bottom of my
guys.
heart. We'll be in
Thank you,
touch
Terry.
and have a wonderful day. Terence,
You
thank you
guys
so
too.
much.
Really enjoyed it. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Take care, guys.
I'll be happy to.
All
Thank
right,
you.
bye-bye.